passages like this Luke one reign not supreme, but large in my head. And not necessarily for the best or healthiest of reasons. A lot of passages like this, when I was going to church as a young lad in the 1980s of Western Canada, many of these passages were preached to us as a dire warning. And I've talked to you all about this before, but it always bears repeating because these things are frequently in you so deeply that only when it sort of comes to the surface, you're like, ooh, that was really in there. That's been in there for a long time. We were raised on things, movies, because I was young at the time, though. We play a movie called Thief in the Night. I've talked about this before, but it always bears repeating. And Thief in the Night was about the end of times and the idea that the good Christians are going to be raptured. And so, as I've talked about this before, I don't want to belabor the point, but they always set up it's a sibling. It's the brother who's the good youth pastor, and it's the sister who is the problematic young lady who is, I believe, in one of the films, she's actually starting to light a cigarette. Clearly the sign of a Satan follower. And so she's bad, she's rebellious, she's problematic, and she wakes up in the morning, and there it is. And the sound of it, and other people who were raised in sort of a more evangelical culture in the 1980s know this sound. It's the sound of like Menon. Remember Menon? By Menon. Like one of those like 3-headed electric razors that you plugged in with the curly wire. So you see, kids, sometimes when we grew up, there was things called wires. Not everything was wireless. So you actually had to talk on a phone that only gave you a certain amount of distance, shave this close to the little squirrely wire that was supposed to give you more reach for the amount of cord, but it never quite worked out that one. Somehow pretty early on would freeze up and then you'd find yourself shaving. Not that I had to worry about this in the 80s, but I can only imagine it'd be fairly dangerous to have to lean in and be in weird angles for shaving. But the shaver was just left sitting on the sink in the bathroom because, of course, the good brother had been raptured up. We were always preached this as you've got to stay on your guard. You never know when it's going to come. And the reason why the movie was called Thief in the Night was because it was borrowing off of one of Jesus. It will come like a thief in the night. And so we always had this sort of sense of like, stay on your guard, don't get caught looking at stuff you shouldn't be looking at, or listening to music you shouldn't be looking at, or saying words you shouldn't be saying. And that you kind of always had to be on your toes because Jesus is going to get you. Now I'm exaggerating, but not that much. It really was a sense, and especially as a teenager, there really was a sense of you need to be on guard and not embody the rebellious, anti-gospel, anti-Christ milieu of your teens. And so it spawned a whole bunch of teachings. And I remember I was getting really into rock and roll music, which was just a real unfortunate time to get into rock and roll music in the 80s because I went to the library in Calgary. I used my little card and I waited till nobody was looking and I got AC/DC's Who Made Who on vinyl. Oh, I'm so excited. But I had to be quiet because I'd been raised that AC/DC was not a designation of electricity or anything, right? Is that right? Yeah. We're going to get to the ways in which my knowledge base is inadequate very, very soon. But I was told it meant Antichrist devil child. Satan music. Yeah, Kiss, who I'm not a huge fan of Kiss. I will go on record saying that. I mean, I love what they've done, but I'm not a huge fan of the music. Kiss was short for Knights in Satan's Service. And if that wasn't enough, all you had to do was play those records backwards. Witchcraft and pro-Satan stuff. And this was it. And Thief in the Night, these sorts of passages terrified me. Terrified a whole bunch of us. And we struggled with just normal teen stuff. And that added a sort of bonus there. But we had a wonderful question from one of our young parishioners last week about is everything set ahead or do we have free will? And I think that's great because Christians have been debating this forever. Some denominations, some teachings land on all sorts of stuff. So we're not going to solve it, but we are going to discuss it. I think it's a great topic to wrestle with in Advent. Because some of the ways in which my inadequacies were pointed out to me has been in some of the people I've been working with lately. Now, as we mentioned before, I have no sense of direction whatsoever. This is actually a pre-video conversation, but this is actually a pre-service conversation of how absolutely unable, like almost to the level of being a spiritual gift, to know where I am at any given time. I have no concept of anything. I I should have thought this out ahead of time. I have oh my gosh, I really should have thought this out. I've been working out, so it's a little hard to get my arm. That's pretty swollen over there. Okay, that wasn't a joke. I have a compass tattooed on my forearm. Turns out that's not how compasses work. So that actually ended up being a bit of a waste of skin and money. But you know what? You deal with what you deal with. You do what you do. I will absolutely get lost in a phone booth. I have no sense of anything like that. I'm very dependent, first off, on signs, road signs, that sort of stuff. But then, thankfully, and the Lord in his infinite wisdom raised me at a time where GPS was reality. I am like a safety blanket. I need GPS to find my way anywhere. And so my understanding of signs has been very clear. I don't know that I ever connected the dots of saying like, oh, spiritual signs and road signs, but that is kind of, when I think of signs, my first sort of thought is like, you know, this is the exit to the 401, or this is whatever street you're going on to, and these are the sorts of things. I think of signs. However, my time here, my time with a variety of other Christians who've grown up in less urban settings, more rural settings, have different understandings of signs. Signs that would actually be understandings of signs that would actually be closer to what it is that Jesus was talking about. The ability to see the world and what is taking place in the world. To understand the path, as Jesus says, a tree is on. You can look at a tree and see what it is saying to you. Hear what it is saying to you. If the buds are coming, all right, the weather's getting warmer. The tree is doing what trees do. We talked about, it's always that day, December 1st, it's a good day when you have to get up and shovel the car off. Well, it's fall, but we know winter's coming. Officially, it starts December 21st, but we know the snow is here, and we could ignore it, but that would be to our own detriment. And before the snow comes, we could start to feel it in the air. So these are not any alien concepts. And as always, Jesus takes big, scary ideas and makes them very small and approachable. That's actually the spirit of the gospel, is taking infinity and making it present. That's the spirit also of Advent. Taking things that are too big, salvation, meaning, purpose of life, and making them so small that we represent it with a single candle, or a second candle, or a third candle, or a fourth candle, but still just candles, imminently vulnerable to wind, can snuff it out. And then God takes this moment of salvation and boils it all the way down to a tiny human baby of a small amount of pounds and a small amount of ounces. I know if I were to say that to Mary, she may look askew to me, but still, in the grand scheme of things, to a small baby. And not just that, but small baby in a small part of the world, to a very small human being in very fragile circumstances. Smaller and smaller and smaller. And that baby is going to grow to give us understandings of signs. That as we walk in the ways of faith, and brothers and sisters, I know this, I can speak to this, let me say that. I believe this and have evidence from my own life. We are given opportunities to exercise and deepen our faith every single day. Multiple opportunities to sit back and go, okay, what would Jesus do? What is God showing me in this moment? The stuff we label as good, the stuff we label as bad, and probably most importantly, the stuff we label as mundane. God is always in those presents because that's what the season is about. This is why we call him Emmanuel, God with us. This is when we're going to celebrate months from now, Pentecost, that same God dwells within us, so that every mundane, good and terrible act we're in can and should and will become an act of worship if we give ourselves pause and look at the signs as they are being revealed to us. Because the life of faith says signs are always there. Spoiler alert, you're going to get them wrong. The people who preached to me this terrifying gospel really thought they were doing me a service. I believe they genuinely believed, even as now I reflect upon it and completely, wholeheartedly disagree and disavow that understanding. Because Jesus wasn't telling these stories to hide and terrify. He was telling these stories to comfort and clarify. It's like, listen, these things are going to happen. Show of hands, how many are very concerned about the state of the world? Do any of you feel like it's about to get better? No. On every level. Human connection, the economy, health, weather, globally, all these things. Never forget, Jesus says, this is going to happen. This is the nature of the world, human and divine. And humanity is very powerful and reactive. It's very violent and destructive. But there's not a road sign out there, but I've placed signs everywhere because anybody can paint anything on a road sign. Anybody can change a road sign to say something else. A road sign is great when you're on a road. But when you're on a road, you can only go where that road takes you. Depending on how many off-ramps have been designed, you can only go where the road goes. Trust me, they do not like it when you drive off the road. It is not considered an amazing way to spend your vehicular time. There will be people with lights on top of their cars that will miraculously show up. Those same people will get out and they will place you on the hood of a car and put really restricting bracelets on the back of your wrists. And there will be a whole lot of other people that you will never thought you were going to meet that you're going to spend a lot of time with, including but not limited to criminals, drunks, lawyers, and judges. Because roads need to be safe for everybody. But we're not always on roads. And I don't know if it's been your experience, but the life of faith is not a highway. It's not a paved road. It doesn't have those kinds of signs. The life of faith is more like a hike or a walk in the woods. There's paths, but there's freedom. There's the ability to explore. There's the ability to see new stuff. Ditto for canoeing or being on the water. And for somebody who doesn't understand directions, who didn't spend a lot of time in the forest, that can be very scary because everything looks alien. The trees can become overwhelming. The water can be scary and rise up, as Jesus says. But for someone who knows what trees grow where, which side of a tree the moss grows on, what kind of trees are closer to water, what kind of trees are farther from water, there's not a forest in the world that doesn't yield an amazing collection of signs to guide you and protect you. And that's closer to Jesus' teaching on what signs are. Roads limit you even as they guide you, so they have a purpose. Wandering, hiking the woods opens you up. The life of faith is less about this defined path and more about the willingness or the ability to grow and see how God is leading you in all sorts of places that if somebody else were to look at, could look like you're lost. You're in a desperate situation. But if you can turn back, it's like, oh no, I know exactly where I am. You see that tree there? You see that bush there? They're pointing to a river. I know which direction that river goes, and the river ends up in this lake, and my family lives right by the lake. I'm fine. I'm 2 hours from home. I know where the sun is. I know what time it is. I know that it rises in the east and sets in the west. Brand new information for me today. And I know where it is in the sky, so I know which direction is which. I'm fine. So now that I'm fine, I'm free to explore. Because I know I'll get home. Somebody who doesn't know those things, the exact same forest, the exact same spot could be terrifying, overwhelming, and feel completely blind. What Jesus is saying is, I'm here to tell you what trees to look at, what rocks to study, where the sun is, where the moon is, where you are. Everything my Father has put in this world will speak to you. Grow in faith. Because on the other side, when we look at the economy, the social disunity, the weather, the planet itself, we can very easily descend into fear, terror, and division. This entire Advent season, we are going to talk about how much choice we have, what kind of directions we go in, but we need to start with signs. So if you look at the picture in the bulletin, there's a whole bunch of street signs, but there's also a tree. For those whose eyes are working this morning, if you had to hazard a guess, knowing no other context, what time of year would you say that tree is experiencing? Fall. Witchcraft! Witchcraft! How could you possibly know that? A tree there with some green leaves, some orange leaves, and some red leaves. Well, that is truly amazing. That God has given you this deep, profound wisdom and insight to, in unison, say, fall, without even thinking about it, because you've known this since childhood. It's different than, but actually not different than the life of faith. The life of faith says, wherever you are, whenever you are, whoever you are, trust that God is always talking to you, always giving you signs. Amen, amen, amen.